we played a bit of music at the beginning there, a traditional piece of Corsican music, which kind of chose to play at the beginning here, not just because it's a traditional piece of music, but because I feel that it kind of reflects the sort of the haunting spiritual nature of the central theme to this book.
Yeah, it does. There are so many influences in Corsica, which you'll gather from when I read a bit later on, but it's very Moorish, not in the chocolate sort of way, but it's got so many influences, and you've probably got a taste from the music of how tortured the soul of the island is. There's nothing poppy or instrumental about it. It's all about tortured voices and people trying to make themselves heard. That is the nature of the island, and that's one of the aspects that drew me towards the island in order to write the book.
So tell us more about that. I mean, obviously, some of your experiences from your early days have inspired the book. What's the real background? What really inspired the book? How did you come across the story of Mazzeri?
Well, you kind of trip across stories. They come to you or you trip across them. I started to write Mazzeri as another book. I started to write a book called Written in the Sky, which I was writing as a novella, because I've always written short stories, and I've never, well, it's not since I was 22, I haven't written a novel. And I wanted to write a short story about a love affair in Corsica. And when I started to research the novel properly, I realised I knew a great deal more about the subject than I thought I originally did. And when I was 16, as a family, we were on holiday in Corsica. We used to go to a campsite just north of Porto Vecchio, which is in the southwest of the island. And we stayed there for mostly 4 weeks in the summer. And one night, several nights, we used to sleep on the beach because it was much cooler to sleep on the beach than it was to sleep in a tent. But the campsite was owned by an old boy called Giacomo Agostino. And he had a very beautiful daughter. I may have modelled Manu slightly on his daughter. But his daughter was stolen from him by an old friend of his, who was a compatriot from the resistance during the war. And Marcel, who ran off with Agostini's daughter, used to sail into the bay every day and toot the hooter of his ship to wind up Agostini and remind him that he pinched his daughter. Well, one night Marcel was moored off the beach, and Agostini and his henchmen went to the boat, and they stole the outboard of Marcel's tender to his big boat, and they took it ashore. Sure enough, a while later, Marcel came ashore with his henchmen to find out where the outboard of his boat had gone. So at one end of the beach you had Agostini and his henchmen, the other end of the beach you had Marcel and his henchmen, and in the middle of the beach I was sleeping in a dugout in the beach with a pal of mine from Brighton, Tim Austin. And we were in our sleeping bags, not really aware of what was going on. And suddenly this enormous firefight erupted between both parties, one at one end of the beach and the other. And it was pistols and machine guns and all that sort of thing. And my father was standing at the back of the beach wondering what he should do. Tim and I were lying in our beds as these bullets whizzed over the top of us. Anyway, later on during the night, Marcel, my father, another English doctor who was patrolling the camp, found this guy, Marcel, leant up against a tree with 2 small bullet holes in his chest. And they left the place. The next morning the police arrived, and when they went back to see what was going on, this fellow Marcel had had his entire chest blown away with a shotgun. So what it was that had killed him the night before was obviously being disguised. Now Agostini, the law in France, or in those days in Corsica, was that if you shot somebody on your premises with a shotgun, it was self-defense and therefore manslaughter. But if you shot somebody with a pistol, it was first-degree murder. Now Agostini, being the old Corsican bandit, ran off into the mountains, and the police eventually found him and brought him back, and I think he had a 3-month suspended sentence, and then he was let go again. So he got off pretty much. But that was one of the parts that inspired me to write the story.
Also, clearly, obviously, a lot of your experiences have helped form the book. How much of the book actually is really based on yourself and some of your experiences, and how did you develop the characters in the book?
Well, the first thing to say, I think, is that one or two people have rung up and said, "Oh, are you Richard Ross?" Which clearly I'm not. But writers, and I can't speak for all writers, but most writers write from within. You write from experiences and you record things that you've seen, happenings, events, people. But once you start writing, and once I started writing, I found that many of the characters in the book, particularly Manu and Camille, if you read the book, I try not to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it yet. I'm sure there must be some there. They kind of walk out of the pages towards you. You don't mould your characters to the story so much as come to know the characters as you're writing them, and then you hope that they're going to want to react in the way that you want them to react in order to facilitate the story moving on in a particular direction. But it all comes to you slightly organically. I mean, I do wake up very early in the morning, which is probably one's most fertile time, and I just allowed it to come. I based it on some people that I knew, but not particularly on people.
We'll talk a bit more about that later.